So if you're dealing with a duodenal ulcer, there's no part of that that's fun, but they'll kind of group these together as peptic ulcer disease. And whether you have an ulcer in your stomach or this here, the duodenum, which is basically the first 10 inches of the small intestine, is called the duodenum. And if an ulcer is here, they'll just kind of group that together and say, peptic ulcer disease, there you go. But in this video, I'm going to help you understand that these things can be very different. And it's not always the same situation going on, and you might want to think about a few different things. Because when you're having a duodenal ulcer, you kind of want to look at the fact that, well, am I having pain with food? Or am I having pain after I have food? So some people with a duodenal ulcer will even say, oh, when I eat, I actually feel better. And then it's later on that night, in the middle of the night, that I'll wake up in horrible pain and I'm screaming. Because one of the symptoms that a lot of people will have is cussing, because the pain can be significant. This is not just, I need a little boo-boo Band-Aid. This can be quite a lot of pain. But there's a valve here in the stomach that when food comes in, this valve will close so that this food can be properly acidified so that it can be broken down. That's why we eat food, so that we can break the food down and get the nutrients out of that food. And to do that, the stomach has to make hydrochloric acid, or HCl, and that acidifies that food in the stomach. But this valve will close to keep the acids from coming out here. So if a person has an ulcer out here in the duodenum, then when they eat food and this valve closes as things are acidifying, they will find some relief. So that can actually be a sign of, do I have a duodenal ulcer or a stomach ulcer? Can be when that pain happens. Now, that doesn't mean this valve is always going to close correctly. It's kind of triggered by stomach acid. So if someone isn't making enough stomach acid, we'll talk about that in a bit. But then that valve may not close, and then the timing of when that pain comes could vary. So just because you have pain during the meal doesn't absolutely mean that ulcer's in the stomach. It could still be in the duodenum, but for most people, that's kind of how it's going to work. So in this video, I want to help people understand what's going on, what can cause this situation, and things you need to think about. But I also want people who read my books and take my courses to understand how to avoid getting one of these duodenal ulcers. So we want to talk about that a little bit too. Let's jump in.
T.C. Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Now, another possible symptom we could see with duodenal ulcers is loose stools. And this is not something you're going to see all the time, but we want to understand why that might happen, and we'll talk about that in a second. So when we're looking at the causes of a duodenal ulcer, it's very common for people to believe that NSAIDs, which is a type of medication, can create a duodenal ulcer, and a lot of people feel that way in the medical world, and so that's important to at least understand. But most people view duodenal ulcers as being caused by H. pylori, which is a bacterial infection that happens in the stomach, and it's very common, and most people seem to have H. pylori in their body. It's a completely common infection, but there's problems that can make that infection go out of control and then create these ulcer type issues. So if that's the problem, then these H. pylori infections can also make it down into here and create an ulcer in this area here. So that's totally a possibility. But when we're looking at this, we also need to understand some of the mechanisms that can happen with digestion, because this stomach lining here is made to hold that HCl, that stomach acid. It's supposed to be in there. But once we get down to the small intestine, and the duodenum is really just the first part of the small intestine, once we get down there, then this lining is not made to hold that stomach acid. So when this stomach acid leaves the stomach and goes into the duodenum, then what's going to happen is two things. First of all, this is the pancreas, and that kind of squirts some digestive enzymes down here to help us break that food down a little bit better. It also squirts a little bit bicarbonate, which is an alkaline substance that helps us neutralize those acids so that these acids don't continue going through the intestinal tract. The acids are made to break down protein. Well, guess what this intestinal tract is made of? It's protein. So if these acids continue to go through here, then they have the ability to damage that lining. and that could create a type of ulcer situation. So the bicarbonate is meant to help us neutralize those acids, but what most people don't know is that the bile that is stored in this gallbladder here, that also gets squirted down when the acid product leaves the stomach. When the acids leave the stomach, that triggers these other actions to take place. And the bile is also alkaline. Now, bile is this soapy substance. It helps us emulsify our fats and break down those dietary fats so the body can use them. But the bile also helps us neutralize these acids. And when the acid product meets this alkaline bile, it creates a sizzle. And the sizzle really helps us bust the food apart and get all the nutrients out of that food. But it's really common for someone's bile to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And this gallbladder is meant to concentrate that bile. So if the bile's not flowing, it just kind of stays in there, continues to get concentrated and gets more sludgy and can even form into gallstones. So it's really common for bile not to be flowing correctly. It's not coming down here to neutralize these acids, and then these acids are staying in this intestinal tract, and that can create an ulcer type situation. Now this can also lead us back to these loose stool things, because if the acids are not neutralized, the body's like, well, I can't just have this stuff digging a hole through the intestinal tract and burning a hole in me, and somebody's going to leak cheeseburgers all over their insides. So I'm going to bring all the water that I can to cool down these acids, and then I'm going to rush it out the back door as fast as I can, and then lifts the person off the toilet like a rocket with their amazing diarrhea. So it is common to see some loose stool issues when somebody's dealing with this, just because the underlying cause can create both of those problems. Now, if an ulcer is bleeding, now a lot of people do believe that can cause loose stools as well, but you can see that a loose stool could happen even if that ulcer was not bleeding and completely problematic, just from the inability of those alkaline bile and the bicarbonate to really neutralize those acids. And this could also be a case if a person was not making enough stomach acid, because if they're not making enough stomach acid, then they're not really triggering these other things to happen down the line. So the bicarbonate may not really come out, and the alkaline bile may not come down to help neutralize those acids. So now the small amount of acid that is in there may be not enough to trigger the valve, but it's enough to cause some trouble as it moves through the system. It will also, when it's less acidic, it will move through the system slower, and contact with those tissues may be longer and give it more time to create problems. So the other thing that we want to think about when we're looking at this H. pylori situation is that H. pylori is usually a problem when there's not enough stomach acid. When there's enough stomach acid, that'll keep that bacteria in check, and it's not going to create all that trouble. But if somebody's not making enough stomach acid, which is very common for a wide variety of reasons, then that H. pylori could flourish. So you can see there could be a variety of underlying causes that are creating this ulcer situation, because the H. pylori could be coming down here and irritating those linings and creating an ulcer, or the lack of stomach acid is keeping from signaling these other things to take place that are supposed to come down here and neutralize those acids, and that could be creating a problem. So we really need to keep in mind, is this a poor bile flow issue that's not coming down and neutralizing these problems? Or maybe is it the low stomach acid that's creating that trouble? So when we like to see people fix a low stomach acid issue, and we'll put a link to our video for 10 signs for low stomach acid, we like to see people supplement with HCl, but we never like to see anybody supplement with HCl unless they're taking steps to thin this bile out and make sure that it can come down and neutralize the acids leaving the stomach. Because if the stomach is getting acidic enough and those acids are leaving the stomach, but the bile can't come down here and neutralize those acids, then that's going to create some trouble. So if you think this could be a problem for you, we're going to put a link in the description below this video for our videos on 10 signs of poor bile flow, and then our other video on 5 steps to thin your bile and help that flow better, just to make sure that you can correct that situation and make sure that you have the ability to neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. But right now, if you think this is a problem, jump over and watch our video on how to deal with a duodenal ulcer. I can't wait to hear about your results.